it can be life-changing to have access to opportunities that you wouldn't normally have access to because of where you live.
Welcome to the TroopHR Podcast. I'm your host, Taylor Bradley. And today I'm joined by someone who truly embodies what it means to lead in a modern, global workplace. Madeline Grecek is the Global Director of People at Remote.com, where she's helping reshape how organizations think about performance, workforce planning, and access to talent across borders. We're both part of companies that have embraced fully remote models, and I'm excited to dig into what that actually looks like beyond the buzzwords. So we start at the ground floor as always by asking Maddie, in her experience working in or leading within fully remote environments, how has she seen remote work evolve over the past few years?
Oh, that's such a great question. I won't go into all the details of my own personal journey and what I've seen from the HR lens, but I've definitely had a really interesting point of view or point of perspective. And so I have been hybrid/remote for over 6 years now. And interestingly enough, it started in higher ed of all places. And when you think of higher ed, you think they're not normally the progressive, innovative area, right, where they're breaking down the barriers to work. But I remember being so excited about the opportunity that I had at the higher ed institution. I was working at a Big Ten school, and without the option of hybrid, because it was an hour and a half away, one way for me, which was a 3-hour round trip daily for me to be able to work there, the offer of hybrid work was my first introduction into remote. And what I learned very quickly is that when you remove the barriers of location and looking for regional talent in a specific set of miles, right, 50-mile radius or 100-mile radius, it really opens the doors not just for employees and not just for talent, but for employers. And so I've been able to see that year over year in my career. And so from that point on, I have worked for fully remote companies. And I credit where I am now in my career to the fact that remote work is a possibility in this day and age. So I have seen it break down barriers, and working at remote, being able to interact with people all across the world has completely changed my capability as an HR, professional, but it's also just widened the spectrum of where we can find talent. I really think that it is one of the key reasons remote has been so successful today.
Agreed. And when I worked at Squarespace, one of the opportunities that we identified when breaking down barriers of where we actually hired is you saw an increase in a couple of things. One, you saw an increase in diversity of the workforce. When you're pulling just from one area, even as diverse as New York, you may end up getting an homogenous workforce in the diversity of thinking, the diversity of approach to problems, and also your ability to connect with a diverse client base. So when we started to hire all over the United States, we saw an increase across the board in that aspect, but also your money would go so much further. When I say your money, your budget would go so much further for hiring talent when you didn't limit yourself to some of the most costly markets in the world. That I think may sound counterintuitive to some folks, not realizing, okay, if I still have a New York-based budget, but I can go out to Atlanta or Cincinnati, I can get the cream of the crop in that market. What are some of the other things that you would point out to folks that still may be skeptics of a remote first or remote employer?
So I think that you hit on a really good point, right? Which is budget. And for those companies that are located in high cost of living areas where you will pay a premium dollar for talent, this really allows your budget to go further, as you said. But it also allows you to find talent that isn't as costly, but also maybe a higher quality outside of the realm of where you would traditionally look. And I think that is the key. Also, it is a huge lever for a business to be able to maximize their dollars around talent. It's also when you add in the layer of being able to strategically target specific areas because we are able to look at the industry, look at the landscape, see where talent exists. And we do a really good job of helping to create a pipeline, right? We have a recruit model now. And so when you're creating that input and then you give people the ability to kind of search for talent anywhere and not have budget or region be a barrier, it opens a whole new world in terms of what the business is capable of and what talent is capable of or what you're able to do. One last thing, I've also seen the difference that it has made for people in their personal lives. And it can be life-changing to have access to opportunities that you wouldn't normally have access to because of where you live.
I've been remote since 2018. So I always like to say I was remote before it was trendy. Now it's not so trendy anymore. We've had that regression to
Yeah.
the mean. And for me, one area, especially when I started to work in higher levels of HR over the years, is in a remote environment, you have to be even more intentional about employee engagement, employee coaching, performance. These things are actually more challenging in a remote environment. And I'd love to hear from you because you've had such depth of experience in a remote setting. What are some of the challenges that may have been a surprise to you?
I think one of the biggest challenges for me is the amount of intentional planning or just intentionality in general that you as a leader or even just a remote employee have to put into building relationships. They don't happen organically as they would in an in-person environment. And in the past, when I have been in an in-person environment, it's been very easy for me to build relationships and build connections and, brainstorm and have conversations. And when you're planning and you're a leader of an organization or an area of the business, you have to be able to set really clear objectives of where we're going and how we're going to get there. You have to rally the troops around that. You have to make sure everyone feels confident about the work they're doing, set clear expectations. And then you also have to be able to talk to them and engage with them on a personal level. And that's a really critical component of being able to build a strong team, a team that you can support and a team that can support you also. And that takes time, but it also takes, I would say it takes more time, but it's because you don't have the ability to do that in a personal setting. I would argue the fact, though, that I think it's still cool to be remote. And I have seen the quality of talent increase when it started to become less of a given after 2020. And I think that's because the workforce is speaking and they're speaking with their feet and they know what they want. That high performing talent is going to go where they feel valued, where they feel like they can deliver impact, but where they also have the flexibility and autonomy and the appropriate work-life balance that's going to support them for their own growth and wellness. And so what I see now is a little bit more of a competitive landscape around talent too, which is great for an employer because it just makes that pool so much bigger.
I also agree that working remote is fantastic. And at our organization, we are mostly fully remote. We have some offices where clients require us to have on-prem work, but we are very intentional about regional meetups. I've gone to several this year where we do create opportunities for people to meet each other in person. And I'll echo what you said, because I think it's something that has made me so proud to work at the organization that I work at currently is the amount of people that I get to meet and work with and have I should say, the honor of working with daily from around the world, dozens of different countries, is fascinating. And
Yes.
I absolutely love what type of environment that you and I have worked in affords us to do. It's also exceptionally challenging. I got to say, you have to learn and think on your feet when it comes to employment law around the world, which is materially different. But I'm sure, like you, it's sharpened my skills as an HR professional. And that brings us a bit to your organization. Now, I was jazzed up to be able to talk to you today. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what does your organization do? And then let's start to peel back some of the layers on that.
So remote started out as an EOR, so an employer of record. And initially, we were offering the services of allowing employers to be able to hire talent through our organization anywhere in the world. And as you said, the legalities of some of that is what most businesses struggle with. So as remote grew, especially during the pandemic, because remote work exploded, we also were building a pretty fantastic product. And that's actually what drew me to remote was I have this interesting journey of how I got here. I was hired as an employee through remote at my previous organization with a Canadian-based organization who did not have the infrastructure to hire outside of Canada. And so they were using remote. So I was hired through remote as an employee. I experienced the product. My first experience was onboarding on my phone through their app. I finished my onboarding within about 2.5 minutes. And I remember looking at my husband and saying, I don't know what this tool is, but I need to know. And then I became a customer because I was hired as an HR director and they were a vendor of ours. And I became a huge fan. What we do is we just enable hiring and managing your workforce end to end. It's no longer an employer of record. We still offer that service. But we're really focused on making this service available to any company. It doesn't matter if you want to be an employer of record. You can still use our platform. We have been building our platform for end-to-end employee experience for over 2 years since I joined, and maybe even longer, but I've been here for almost 2 years. And it has been an amazing journey. And so just seeing the doors that it opens, but also the amount of friction that this reduces for HR people, the tool and the way that it's being designed, how intuitive and simple it is. It reduces the manual work and it allows HR professionals to be able to focus on the important things. So it's becoming a tool for the masses, but it's also connecting opportunity for people that are looking for jobs and employers that are looking for talent. So it's really become this marketplace and it's been fantastic to be part of it. So we employ over 90 plus countries. We are focused on eliminating barriers for hiring, which is what we've been talking about. But we are really focused on that aspect of diversity too. And to your point, I have a team of 12. They are all located in different countries. And it has been, like you said, an honor to be able to manage a team like that and just to see the diverse thoughts, the diverse approaches, the cultural differences. And it's only made me a stronger HR professional in the midst of that.
It almost sounds like we have such the same journey over the past 3 years, and I could go on for hours to talk about the things that we've gone through and had to learn, and I'm sure that's reminiscent with you. Now, similar to you all, we do have a marketplace, somewhat type of model. A Turing is not necessarily an EOR, but what I had found is setting up we'll call it marketplace. I think it's more relevant for you all, and workforce forecasting. These things are incredibly complex. I'd love to hear a bit more about your journey, about really establishing those, because it sounds like you've been instrumental in that.
I don't know if I can take all the credit for this. I will say having a leadership that is willing to break down the barriers, willing to challenge the status quo, has really allowed us to deconstruct a lot of these things, including workforce planning and being able to forecast where skills will be needed in the future and where we can actually find them, whether that be upskill them internally. It's kind of around that buy, build, borrow concept, right? That I think we've all been looking at over the last couple of years because it is really a strategic planning exercise. And so at Remote, we really started to dig into what are the things that make it so difficult to manage a workforce. And we started to chip away at some of those things because when you think about that question in general, it just feels completely overwhelming because there's so much, right? And so there's so many things that we can focus on. And what are the biggest levers that we can pull to make improvements in this space? And again, thankfully, being in a technology company has given us the tools and the runway to really be able to try to tackle some of these difficult things. The first thing we decided to challenge in a really big way was the performance process. And, we sat down and we, had a whiteboard, and our leadership team and our people team just sat down and said, let's just break this down, because at the end of the day, there are decades and decades of HR experience in this room. And we are all experiencing the same pain point, and we know everyone else is too. We know that this is one of the most undesired processes of HR, and even HR people sometimes, like, we don't love it either. So we really started to just break that process down. And we said, what makes this so long? Why does it take so much time? Why is it so hard at calibration time? And what we started to uncover was the fact that there had been a lot of buzz around building things into the way of working and, embedding this in your day to day. We say the words, but how do we actually make that happen? How do we actually put that into practice? And so what we realized was that we need to embed it in the behaviors of our organization. And we need to start with leadership. And so we proposed a monthly snapshot, and we built a platform or a product around that concept. And the concept is that you can report on performance trends at least monthly, but you can also leadership, as the reporting line change goes up, you can at any time check your team or your organization and see the performance health of that team at any moment in time. So it holds managers accountable to the fact of making sure that they are documenting how performance is going for individuals on their team, that they're documenting achievements, blockers, gaps, growth areas, and they're giving us a data point around how that person's doing. It has opened a door for us that we anticipated, but it's been insanely valuable in a lot of different ways. So it's been able to allow us to predict forecasting for promotions. We've been able to identify high performing talent. We do a talent assessment on around potential role criticality, retention risk, but we also wanted to be able to overlay real-time performance data with that. And so once we started this process, we were able to build a dashboard, and we were able to show our leaders at every level of our organization where their teams were in terms of performance, how they were trending, where low performance might have been happening. So we were able to minimize or mitigate that. And then there was a calibration exercise that was going on in tandem with this. So we have carved out time when managers fill out their snapshots, 3 questions, 5 minutes, super easy. And then we have a pre-calibration where our people business partner team will regularly meet with leaders anyway. And so we're just building that into that cadence and that conversation, and we're doing regular checks on performance with leaders. What it's doing is it's also forcing those reporting or those different levels of teams to have the conversations. So leadership can see where things are going, and if they have questions, they can ask them. And what ended up happening too was we got, of course, when we initially proposed this approach, we had the visceral reaction that you can imagine, right? So when an organization hears, we want you to track performance 12 times a year instead of twice, everyone is like, oh my gosh, no, what are you saying? Like, please don't make us do that. That sounds terrible. And what we had to do was we really had to position this message in a way that we could articulate the value for everyone that was going to be involved in it. And that meant talking to them about how we were not asking them to take more time out of their day-to-day to focus on performance, but instead take time that they're spending in maybe one-on-one a month and reinvest that time into a performance conversation and a performance reflection, and then document that in the system so that we can have predictive analytics around it. So that is a step forward, but we are very much looking towards having a very similar approach to skills, right? Interest, and then future needs, future skill needs. So what do we have right now in our organization? What will we need in 12 to 18 months? And then one thing that I did back in my higher education days is that we gauged interest from employees. And that was normally the catalyst or the predictive element for us to be able to say whether or not someone would be successful in the future career path that we were helping them go down. I gave you a big long answer. I'm sorry. Like, it's so hard to put that into a nutshell.
Hey, I'm just taking notes. My goodness. There's so much going on. I love the self-awareness of the terrifying headline of doing performance reviews 12 times a year. I think that will make any manager have a knee-jerk reaction, but it sounds like what you all are doing is giving that regular bite-sized feedback, which is what many organizations I feel struggle with and aspire to achieve. So kudos to all of you. And two final questions for me is one of the biggest areas that we've spent so much time in our organization as people leaders has been cross-functional knowledge sharing and skills growth. And I'd love to just get a snippet from you of how you all have been breaking down barriers and really driving that in a remote environment like yourself.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I have found that has been most successful in this space is creating what I have called in the past as a talent share program. But what it really is they're considered stretch assignments. But when we think about how do we open the door around opportunity for people that are interested in kind of dipping their toe into different areas of the business or learning more, what we find is that we need to do a little bit of an intake process, of course, understand where someone is in their journey, but we need to understand where the gaps are in terms of how much capacity do we have in the organization, where is it most critical, and can we optimize some of our talent in a better way or in a more strategic way. So what we've done in the past is we've been able to create programs around asking leaders, what are the projects that you have on your team right now that you don't have enough capacity for, or that you would be willing to welcome someone else in? If you give us a requirement list of skills and proficiency levels, and if someone raised their hand and said, hey, I self-train on Python, and I've been taking a lot of change management classes, or I want to test out being a project manager. I've never been one, but I've gone through a couple training classes, and I think I could support and shadow. And the idea here is that when you start connecting those dots as an organization, you, one, reduce your dependency on external hiring. You also are able to start to give people a line of sight into where they could potentially start to expand or explore, but you do it without risk. And so I used to call it a try it before you buy it exercise. And the interesting thing that came out of those programs is that managers were able to get a good sense of how this person would operate in this role. How would they perform? Also, the way we carve out our performance is the what and the how, right? So the what is the deliverables, the work that you do, how you approach that work, the quality of it. But then the how are the behaviors, the competencies. How do you engage with people? How do you communicate? How do you take initiative? Do you show intensity? So all of those things are things that a manager or a leader that is willing to take on somebody in their team for a trial basis, they can get a sense for that, right? And they can see, how this person's doing. The person that's trying it out gets a sense of whether or not this is a career change that they are interested in making. But they don't have to leave their current job to do it, right? So they can say, oh, I really like that, or oh, I really hate it, and I'm going down the wrong path. But at the end of the day, what we get is temporary support on critical projects where we're not overextending the existing team. We're also allowing the subject matter experts in our organization to build up their leadership capabilities, because they typically will take these people under their wing and help guide them and help them, give them some tasks, but also monitor them while they're taking on those tasks and guide them so that's that on-the-job practical learning. And what we found after all of this, right, we had some things that we wanted to gain out of it. Obviously, optimizing our workforce, reducing our cost around temporary work and contractors. But the thing that came out of it more than anything was the networking that happened. And the feedback we got from people was, I had a chance to work with people in this organization I would never normally interact with. It raised visibility for people that don't always have that stage that they get on, right? They don't always have the vehicle to be seen, but this gave them an opportunity to be more visible to different parts of the org. And the last thing was the cross-functional knowledge that happened. So if we took someone from customer experience who actually wanted to get into marketing, and they had already done some foundational training and they had learned some things, but they really wanted to try it out. They were able to bring what they know and what they understand from the years of working in customer experience and the knowledge that they have, and they were able to bring it over to the marketing side. And they were able to share it there. And all of a sudden, the marketing team has a much different perspective because someone that has lived it and done it and talked to the customers on the. So it's just kind of like all of a sudden that organically started to happen. And that was probably one of the best things that we saw come out of it, because suddenly everyone was starting to talk the same language. Everyone was organically sharing information, and it wasn't something we had to, push or pull. And you started to see these networks and these connections and partnerships just grow and take on a life of their own.
What an amazing experience for folks. I've told, especially with my generalist and my HRBP teams, is I would love to be an incubator for high quality talent that goes out into the organization. We've had many of our own HRGs and business partners become AEs, go over and work in recruiting, or some have gone over into business operations. And I love it. I absolutely love it when my team members get poached in the organization into roles that take them to the next level in their career. There's nothing more exciting than that. And that, again, may panic some managers. If I don't want to lose people, I said, what
Yes.
better way if you're losing it in a positive growth type exchange? So final question for you, this will likely be the easiest, is if people want to get connected with you in your organization, what is the best way to do that?
They could connect with me on LinkedIn for sure. That's always a great way. Or my email address is Madeline Grecek @remote.com. And they could just send me an email, and happy to chat with any other HR professionals or anyone that would like to learn more. It's been an amazing journey, but there's just so much that I've been able to learn. And if I can share it with other people that are interested in exploring these types of things, I'm happy to do it.
Fantastic. Maddie, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the TroopHR Podcast. If you've liked this episode, we would encourage you to like and subscribe. If you would like to learn more about the TroopHR community, you can reach out to troophr.com. In the meantime, keep living the dream.